A little bit of a disclaimer before I start this little series of videos. Um, please keep the comments kind. This subject matter is very hard for a lot of people, and I do think that it is important to point out how these stories were actually treated, because the people that attached to them were real, and I think even in death they deserve respect. So please be kind in the comments. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Hello everyone. This is going to be a really impromptu little series that I unfortunately did not get to finish, but I will take you through as much as I can. Back in 2020, when the lockdown was going on for the pandemic, I started rewatching the 1998 TV series Haunted History, which, for those of you that are old enough, used to air on the History Channel way back in the day. They were some of my favorite things, and I looked forward to watching them every year on that particular network. Now, when I actually started watching these, the entire series was actually up on YouTube. Sadly, it has been taken down now, and that is incredibly frustrating, because it means that I don't think I will be able to finish this particular series that I was doing, which is probably more sad for me than it is for everyone else, considering that this is going to be somewhat of a very serious little set of videos that I'm going to be doing. So, with the pandemic, we also had the protests for the Black Lives Matter. And as I was sort of revisiting the Haunted History segments, I couldn't help but notice that a lot of the ghost stories, when they involved a person of color or even just, women in general, they tended to steer towards the tragic, which is not necessarily uncommon for ghost stories, but a lot of the information was kind of blown up out of proportions in ways that were just there was no reason for them to be quite so sensationalized as they were. And I do think actively contributes to a lot of the stereotypes that still persist to this day with regards to BIPOC people, their spirituality, their bodies, both in life and in death, and how they sort of become kind of titillating stories for the listening public, who usually tend to be made up primarily of white listeners and viewers. So, looking back at that time and the work that I was doing, and to honor some of these dearly departed, I am going to be doing the breakdown segments here that I had initially put onto my live journal. The first one that I would like to talk about is from San Antonio. I found a link to the story about this particular woman, and I actually did have to go on the Wayback Machine to find that initial link that I had put up, because it no longer exists in public space anymore. So, for your education, I am going to read from that particular site. The site itself is called the Sisters Grimm blog, where you would learn about the old San Antonio history and their dark secrets. And I thought this blog was very, very cool. And of course, I will link the Internet Archive section of it in my description box. But let us get into the story proper. The blog post is called The 140th Anniversary of Sallie White's Murder. This was posted in 2016, which I think is very interesting because that was when our initial Black Lives Matter protests started before 2020. It's good to keep in mind that 2016 does not have the same frame as 2020, nor even 2024. So some of the language may not be up to even our most recent modern standards. And I also forgot to mention that, those ghost stories that were being told by Haunted History back in 1998 were also a product of their time. But I do think it is important to humanize the stories of the people that were there because as much as I love ghost stories, the sensationalization, especially when it pertains to deceased BIPOC folks, tends to look different than if it were for someone who was white. So bearing that in mind, let's keep going. Who was Sallie White? Sallie White was a chambermaid at the Menger Hotel when she met an untimely death on March 30th, 1876, by the hands of her common-law husband, Henry Wheeler. Henry was said to have been a very jealous man and didn't like the attention his attractive mulatto wife would receive from other men. They would often get into arguments that would escalate and leave poor Sallie running in fear for her life. Their arguments were said to have reached a boiling point when Henry eventually shot and killed his wife near the Menger Hotel. Below is a newspaper article that talks about the murder. Another outrage. Malicious and probably fatal shooting of a Negro woman by her crazed husband. The peaceful neighborhood of the rear of the Menger Hotel was yesterday morning suddenly disturbed by pistol shots, succeeded by the shrill shrieks of a female. A Negro by the name of Henry Wheeler was murdering his wife. The tale runs thus. Wheeler and his wife have been very quarrelsome for some time, and complaints of abuse from her husband have been carried to the recorder's court, where the offender has met justice. Monday evening, Wheeler seemed to be very angry about something, and finding that his wife was absent from home, proceeded to search for her in the surrounding neighborhood. He was successful in his search, and immediately upon meeting her, began to abuse her to the extent of his calamitous capacity. On returning to their dwelling, Wheeler made the open and bold declaration that he would murder her, storming and swearing all the while. The woman could bear his threats and abuse no longer, and sought the protection of the police. The house was searched, but no arms found. But still the woman said, "He will kill me if I stay here tonight." Finally, arrangements were made for her to spend the night at the recorder's office, where she went in peace and slept until yesterday morning undisturbed. She awoke between the hours of 6 and 7 and proceeded to go home. Arriving near the dwelling, she was again met by her husband, who, with a 6-shooter in his hand, proceeded to carry out the determined work of her death. He seized her, He fired, the ball wounding her severely in the bowels. She ran, and after her he went, firing 2 other shots and felling the partner of his bosom of the south side of the Minger brewery. The act from beginning to end is a revolting one, being accentuated by pure malice aforethought, making him, it would seem, if the woman dies, subject to the highest punishment the criminal offender has to bear. San Antonio Daily Express, March 29th, 1876. Sallie's death. In the newspaper article above, it mentioned that her husband Henry would be punished if Sallie died. Unfortunately, it took poor Sallie 2 days to die from her wounds. In the meantime, Henry took off and left town and was never heard from again, nor prosecuted for her murder. Because the Minger had loved Sallie White and the great employee she had been, they paid for her funeral costs of $32. The receipt can only be seen today inside the lobby in a glass display case. Sallie haunts the Minger Hotel today. They say Sallie White's spirit can be seen today, roaming the hallways of the Minger Hotel and carrying on with her normal chambermaid duties. Guests that stay the night at the hotel have reported to see a maid in an old-fashioned uniform coming into their rooms and disappearing right in front of their eyes. One woman saw a maid at the end of the hallway and approached her to ask for more towels, but when she called out to her, she ignored her. Perplexed, she walked closer to the maid, who then turned and walked into an empty room. When she approached the room and looked inside, there was no one in it. The maid had disappeared. A few months back, one of our staff members had just finished a dinner and ghost tour inside of the Minger Hotel. As they were putting the remaining supplies in the storage closet, the door suddenly slammed behind them. Startled, they turned and saw the doorknob begin to twist and turn violently. They approached the door, turned the still-moving knob, and slowly opened the door. But they found no one in sight. Perhaps this was Sallie continuing on with her daily duties. There are comments under that particular blog post that talk about seeing Sallie. And again, I am a huge fan of ghost stories. But as I get older, I do also have to acknowledge the fact that there's always a sense of kind of almost like a group panic when it comes to going on ghost tours and things of that nature. Ghost tours tend to have the effect of, spooking people, which of course is the idea behind those things. That cold shiver that runs up your spine is exactly the reason why we go on these types of tours, right? I find that if you are someone who is listening to their gut instincts, as we all actually have that ability, it's just whether or not you have honed it, listened to it, practiced with it, sat with it, all of those things. It is better to move away from the crowd and spend more time in the silence and actually feel out the energy. I've actually done this myself on ghost tours, and sometimes there is something to be had there, and other times there's really nothing there at all. And I know this is taking some of the fun and some of the sensations out of ghost tours, but if you are really looking for a serious experience, it's always just best to sit with the energy, away from other people. Now, in the case of Sallie White, do I think that she is haunting the hotel? I I don't know. A lot of people have said that they have seen a maid walking through the corridors, but they never specifically say what she looks like, besides, being female presenting and, wearing a blue frock and an apron. But again, the sensation around this particular telling has to do with a very real young woman who was alive and then was shot and killed by her husband in a very violent manner. And even though it was actually kind of nice of the hotel to pay for her funeral, because that is not something that gets experienced very often with stories in regards to BIPOC folks. There's another link that I'm going to put in my description box, which is for Ask a Mortician, where one of her colleagues explains in depth, better than I can, about what it is like to be a BIPOC individual, especially a African American individual, and dying in America. It's very important, I think. So, the conclusion of the story, I'm not really sure how to how to end this, honestly. Do I think that Sallie White is haunting the hotel? Honestly, I hope not. I really, really hope not. People of color that die under tragic circumstances deserve peace. I really, really hope that at some point she crosses over. If it is indeed Sallie who is haunting that hotel. That is all for this particular story, my dears. I hope that it wasn't too sad, and that you will join me on this little segment in the next one.